started our hike the other day. The lighthouse is on the left side. Puffin Island. Pretty long bowling court. This whole complex is the remains of a castle that we just passed under. Just noticed after sitting there for 5 minutes. Looks like a pretty little cute tribute to a former employee and fellow worker, Rodney. The castle just before we get to Crewe. Well written ad. Flying towards Glasgow, Scotland on a really high-speed train for England. About 1 hour outside of Glasgow. Now whether we're in Scotland or not, I don't know. Flying now. This is a map of the Glasgow and Glasgow immediate area, if you will. Hostel is the Euro Hostel. As you can see, a little bit off center up left. And today what I'm going to do is start there. First of all, this morning, get a roll or something from the store nearby, and then go down and look at this bridge and this pedestrian bridge, which is one of these two. And then another bridge. And then I'll start hitting some of these sites kind of along in this direction here, like that. It's my hostel there. It's 7 or 8 floors, not including the roof. 360 beds, managed primarily solely for money. They'll nickel and dime everything they can, provide minimal services, probably best demonstrated by signs on every floor and receptacles on every floor for hand sanitizer. The sign saying, use the hand sanitizers. All of them are empty and probably have been for months. That's just an indicator. Kitchen almost bereft of the normal utensils, like a stack of dishes, and a sign saying, get your dishes from the front desk. But when you go there, apparently they don't know what you're talking about. It's not the worst. The worst one, Hostel, is just a little ways away. My first walk, as I said, up the river. I'm just panning the other buildings. That's an old one, isn't it? A looking one. So here's the river, and we're going to work my way along this bike path, which looks like a heck of a great bike path. I'll walk up, and then I'll walk back. As in London, this old-looking bridge stands beside, I think, the remains of perhaps an older bridge. Although, that's difficult to say without really knowing, because this one may have replaced the one next to it, which I think is the train bridge. I came across that coming into Glasgow Central. I like to look at the darker parts of the infrastructure. It's where great novels are setted. In other words, what would someone like Dickens have, how would he have put this scene we're seeing into a movie, or I mean into a book? He would have. Or Hugo's Les Miserables. Centuries from now they will have anti-gravity machines, and they'll chuckle at a video showing all of this steel holding up the railroad lines and trains that rumble across. And here the next bridge as we move, I think, upriver. And I'll walk down underneath here. A couple more bridges. The first one, of course, the pedestrian bridge. I don't think that's the really unique one, so that must be behind us. We'll see it a little bit later. I'm dressed this morning with 3 jackets on. and carrying my 4th rain jacket around my waist. It's already sprinkling, so I'm confident I'll have that out in a few minutes and put my leggings on though. You can tell something about the character of a city when you look at its infrastructure and realize that it's build and forget. Well, traipse across this, you can actually feel this bridge bounce up and down a little bit. Interesting. Seems to be a well-used bridge. That's a good thing. Modern buildings alongside this river. And there, what looks like the London Eye, but it's not. It's stationary and it looks like just an arch. So we'll walk down, see if we can get to that. This little tradition persists here mildly. I love the person who uses a combination lock. We'll say that here, at least, there's some novel architecture. That's pretty and interesting, particularly that curiosity on that far left building. Interesting from a distance, on the right side, it looks like a cavity, but up close you can see that it's stonework. It creates that illusion. Church across this river. No, I have no idea what one it is or whether we'll get to see it. I wonder at the dining appeal of this river floating structure. This is a modern designed riverside condo project or apartment project. When I say modern, I should say industrial design, industrial modern design. But this seems to be the only unit that, well, maybe the one down next to it, yeah, that takes any pride or any pleasure in its patio, if you will, by putting up flowers and vegetation of some sort. The rest almost totally abandon it. The one you see down there further, right where the bicyclist is behind, those are just weeds. We walked under that Kingston Bridge before I put on my full wet gear, pants and jacket, and now I actually feel warm. And I think that's not a church, but it may be. This, which I think is a pedestrian bridge. I don't know what bit of marine memorabilia this is, although what it reminds me of are a couple of winches on the back of a ferry boat to lift up the platform and to lower it for our vehicles. It's nice that somebody took the time to put this sign here. You hope that it worked out. The only thing that would surprise me about the weather today is if it doesn't snow. And I'll pan around from this pedestrian bridge before we walk over it, so you can see we've got some interesting architecture to look at. Look at that big shiny half arc in the back to the left of this Hilton Garden Inn, and then this, which they call the Armadillo, and then the Rotunda, whatever it is, not to mention that other modernistic spherical building. One of two reasonably interesting architectural buildings that bookend these three ugly buildings. Why don't cities protect their own aesthetic? This little outcropping that I'm on architecturally for the bridge is designed to give us a view of itself. Across the street. I want to see what that building there. No, this is the Rotunda, whatever it is, I'll have to find out. Being completely redone, apparently, on the outside at least. Probably 19th century. This old, interesting building. It says East Wind up on top there. Here, Clyde Navigation Trust. I'm betting that those are towers that perhaps function like control towers at an airport. I'll do another pan. Interesting contrast of the modern and the old. An interesting contrast between the old and the new right next to it, if not in fact a part of it. Shooting across the river at the Armadillo. And then what must be a sports arena or a civic center. And then look in the back on the right there, an old tower and towers from perhaps a church. And then finishing this little pan with another building that looks suspiciously similar to the rotunda that we just saw under restoration. Contrast of the modern, a building that looks suspiciously like that rotunda we just looked at under restoration. And notice there in the background to the left of that huge old crane, I don't know that it's still used, it could be, but I don't know that it is a tower from something, a spire from a church to the left, and a spire between the tower and two twin towers, suggesting maybe a total of 3 churches in there, plus whatever that tower is. Not to mention what looks like something of a, and we'll focus in on that, Oriental, or more likely Muslim look. And there are mosques and a Sikh facility here, like church, I forget what they call it. And here that looks more like a spaceship, like it's round, but it's actually spherical if we were looking down on it. And then this pretty bridge which looks light, and yet that pinprick in the center almost seems science fiction, space-like. If I were to describe the Scots you encounter on the street, so far I would say, to be gracious, taciturn. Not the rudeness of Poland, because they simply don't react other than what is necessary if you engage. 1934 it seems to say. BB Scotland on our left, and that building we saw a snippet of before we'll walk down, look at, and then I can cross that bridge there. So we have arrived at the Glasgow Science Centre, which accounts perhaps for what to me looks like a chrysalis, or in other words a cocoon, but I think may represent a cell. Sits beside and is connected to that building which we had seen earlier and just moments ago from the other side. So there's our cocoon, and there is what is a very large building compared to the small profile we'd seen so far. And here is a tower that I read about that apparently is designed to cope with the wind. Now there's a portion here, you may make it out in the middle. It comes down and it flares to the right here and then down. It's kind of like a vertical wing, if you will. But apparently, if you're in that tower, it can shake or shimmy or something like that, shiver in the wind, which unnerves people. Wouldn't you know it, inside our cocoon is a Starbucks. Since I've got a Starbucks reward something or other, I'll go in and see if they can figure out how to use that on my cell phone. What this reminds me of is that super high-tech vertical sail on a sailboat that I saw in a magazine. So this is that tower, and you can see that it's 12 meters below its pivot point to the upper bearings that it can roll or rotate on. And then that's the lower bearing, and that's what the bearing looks like. Circular bearing, 65 centimeters in diameter. Apparently it can be turned to face into the wind. We're in a Starbucks, which is not a Starbucks, it's a franchise, so it doesn't accept a free offer I've got coming someday from Starbucks because I signed up for something in Athens and never been able to use it. Apparently this is owned by, as a franchise, the Cinemax or Cin World complex that we're a part of here. I also understand correctly owns the IMAX complex that's in here. Hostel is right about in there. So we've walked from here up to here. Now we'll go back to here, and then at some point in time we'll go down the rest of the way. This is the paddle steamer Waverly, the last steamer of its nature in the world today. This is one of its two huge paddle wheels, almost midship, slightly behind midships, I think. It's like a quasi-perpetual motion machine, but very sophisticated materials. What they call a dock was that large open watered bay area that we saw earlier when we were looking at the tower and the science center. This is an aerial view in 1965. Gives us a look of how it was created. Pretty massive walls that we don't see. We only see this part here, and the rest is covered with grass. The entire complex extends down through this area, including graving or dry docks in which large ships could be pulled out to be worked on. You can see all those bollards there that are designed to hold the ship at the side, of course. And there, if we look closely, and if I use my telephoto, we can see the last tall ship. One of the last tall ships. The other side of the river and upriver, I think. A little feel for the area yet. Okay, this building here, so we're standing here. This building here we've seen right across from the BBC and down a little ways. That, I think, is the large building that is There's that other north road, slightly out of the wind for this perspective of the auditorium. And it's not supposed to be an allusion to the Sydney. Impressive looking structure. And that's called the SSE Hydro. So the rotunda, we'll see if we can get inside, but notice the heavy steel work, typical 19th, late 18th century. Wow, 19th century for sure. Architecture. I wonder how that compares in strength to modern cranes. To the detail around this, like this light standard is original versus what the structure itself is. But notice how it creates a column, Corinthian type column on the top. I imagine this face is new. Playful, but somewhat confusing and distracting, and I'm not altogether sure that it ends up being pretty. Remember, from a distance we could see this building on the right that looked like it had something to do with Islam, and I think it does, or something akin to it. And then this church with its needle-like spire next to it. A beautiful tower on the top, not to mention that pretty banister there. But notice the detail. We'll take a closer look at that in just a moment. Might be the tree of life type of symbol at the bottom of the tree. Notice how lions are so symbolic in so many religions and cultures. The RSNO center is, I have no idea. Allusion to the window screen allows people inside to look out, and others theoretically not to see who's inside from the outside. Continue to move away from the river and the Royal Terrace. These buildings typify the ones on this side, of course, and the ones on the other side of the block are white. Kind of like what I saw in England that were owned by some very old nobility person like the Duke of something or other. And lucky they were in England, the French would have gotten all that back as the people. It's one of those pointy spiked buildings I was looking for, so we'll go over and look at that, but I still would like to find out where that tower is that I saw. Two that I'm standing on is a bike path, or part of it, and here the signs not only define how far it is to walk to these different places, but the time to bike to them. This is an infrastructure that truly is friendly to bikes. As I approached that church, I noticed swinging to my left across the park, maybe that tower, so I'll go look at that first. Covering lots of things as I walk here. Here's the tower over here. I'm panning to the right across the park. There's the double spires that I think we saw. We'll explore those. There is the single narrow one that I want to look at, and here's a beautiful fountain, so we'll start from where I just started this pan. Pretty little parklet that is a front piece across the street from this impressive looking building with the tower that we can see. I'll walk over and maybe we can figure out what it is. Whatever it is, we're at or on Derby Street, but it's under offer, can you believe? Suburbs 11.30, and I wonder if that's Hebrew calligraphy. Impressive entry into that park, which of course you must know belonged to the nobility. That's why it's impressive. But even this little park we got right here might have belonged to somebody, because you'll notice that it had a fence all the way around, substantial enough to warrant those good-sized holes. Just discovered what might have been the tower I was actually looking at, not the building we just looked at. This is further to the right in that pan I made a few moments ago. This iron-pointed fence certainly said to us riffraff, stay the hell out, unless your carriage is allowed in through these magnificent gates. Now we're going down to that, what may be a church, through this beautiful park. Here in the shadow of these two great cathedrals, I think, or churches, our kids' skate park, in which they're allowed to graffiti the bejesus out of it if they like. And here a kids' tube and some kind of ropes playground. Impressive bridge with some monumental type sculpture on it. We'll go take a look at that now. Wonder who that depicts. She's got a ship in one hand. Notice it has no mast. And then tools, a hammer and chisel in the other. She's perhaps the goddess of craftsmen. Woman perhaps at the tiller. Wealthy did know how to live, didn't they? Still do. And here a rough primitive Scotsman with hatchet and knife and bucket in hand. Woman and child, and a she with a spinning wheel, I think. Woman with a mandolin, and look at the relief embroidery, or raised embroidery, if you will, of her elegant gown, or whatever that is that she's wearing. It looks like a two-piece outfit at least. Perhaps a notable Scottish author, or philosopher, or teacher. Here a modern craftsman with his sledgehammer and an anvil, it looks like, and chains hanging from that, and whatever that round thing is, perhaps a gear or something. It has her feet on books, but notice her curved toes. That's got to tell us something culturally. And she has a bag of something in her hand. Could it be gold? And some kind of purse with the strap hanging down. And what is that device on her head? Not quite a hat. Looks more like a bandana. Approaching is not a church, but it is the Glascow Club for lawn bowling. Only riffraff like me never got in here to bowl. We may have cleaned toilets, cooked, but we didn't roll the spheres. This was for the wealthy. This whole area reeks of it. 2006, The Vital Spark, Puffer by George Wiley. Imagine the sense of entitlement that you had when you could enter this building as a member in the day and feel comfortable doing so. And imagine the movie plots surrounding those characters who did not have the right, but did it anyway somehow. A piece of lawn sculpture, an egg surrounding a sphere. Is it our atmosphere surrounding our earth? The symbolism works. So we're now in the Grand Hall, and I have yet to confirm then if this was a church, and that's why the organ is there, or whether it was a bowling green club, or whether it was both in some order. Now it has some of the accoutrements of a church, certainly an organ is, but everything else could just as easily be architecture of the time. So I'll have to research the history. I'll take back everything that I said about this building. It was wrong. It was never for the wealthy. It was always for the public. Built for the public, specifically with the proceeds that came from one of the great international fairs in the late part of the 19th century. And I'll come back here and explore all of this more. It has an organ in it, which you saw, and the purpose of that was simply to entertain the public. And the area around here was surrounded by large exhibits from various countries. Out front was one of the main roadways in the exhibition, even though people for some reason think that the other side should have been where the main entrance was. Now, it's possible that in the broader context what I said was absolutely wrong. Maybe that park was part of one of the exhibitions. Maybe it was filled with exhibits and merely converted to a park afterward. Have to learn more about that to know. The impressive structure, normally only seen and created by churches or by government for themselves. So this is refreshing in history. Now this I'm pretty sure is a church, so we'll get closer to make sure. this is a tribute to the Kelvin that's associated with temperature measurement, or not. Associated with medicine for sure, with those two snake icons. I vaguely remember the name. Of course, Listerine may be including that root. Under the shadow of that club that we visited is this modernistic art, park art. An additional park across the street from that main one that we were in earlier, and approaching in that direction the cathedral, or that church, a part of that bigger park across the street. Here it approaches that church. Orientate you, there's the bowling club, the river that we walked over, the church we're going to visit now, Lister and Kelvin, and then across that street is the large park that we'll go back down into in a few moments to look at a large fountain and then another church with that tower. (1895–1881). An impressive and wide-ranging park. Doesn't look like you can travel it by car, which is good, but by bicycle, yes. South African War of 1899, 1900, 1 and 2. Here, a pleasant little water feature right near that children's portion of the park we walked through early on. You can see that playground tube over there, and here a fountain that we'll go look at. Appears to be a tribute to Robert Stewart. Methinks we do love Robert Stewart. (1811–1866). Burned brightly for that 55 years. Just outside the park is this Hindu cultural center. Looking somewhat Greek-like. Tower I want to get a closer look at. Last view of the church we didn't get to see because they blocked off that one access and gave us no clue as to the other access. Location for people who want to or have to live in the city and own a place. Great resource, the park, close to this tower, whatever it is. Go in search of one tower and find 4. Such a deal. To my right are those 3 towers, the big one and 2 small ones together. So I just wanted to pan and show you this intersection, which in the past and now was probably a very well-heeled place. By that I mean expensive. Notice that the first 2 floors are higher than the third one, giving you those high-ceilinged rooms. And here, this almost Gothic-looking church tied right in with this building here. Now, whether it's part of the church or not, who knows? We'll go find out. This is the original church, either fell down or was knocked down. Anyway, here's our other building. Whatever these towers are for, I don't know. An old building, and what looks to be an even older building with an interesting bust on the top. I tend to look at anything with lots of hair and think it must be Beethoven, but I don't know. Board of Glasgow, the Garnet Bank Public School. And can you guess? It's still in operation. This got Harry Potter written all over it, boys' entrance. Building right next door apparently at one time housed the Bank of China. Almost abandoned old areas of a town is that they don't mess with the architecture, leave it alone in total. So you end up with places like Cook'n World Buffet that may be the original storefront. Behind me a Witherspoon, of which there somebody said 1,500 throughout Britain. Buildings don't look so bad when you take the edge off with the old buildings. Several of these old buildings surviving on this block, this pedestrianized street. This is that building across the street. Sin World business thing is interesting. Almost looks Art Deco. An interesting old street. We'll see more of those buildings, but just look at the modern equivalent and almost analogous with that curved tower-like portion in the center of that black building. We turned left and we didn't look at that building because we wanted to look at these buildings. Notice church further down and 1, 2 more churches after that, it looks like. Some of those upper stories just dripped with moss. George's Tron Parish Church. But it also says Nelson Mandela Place. Interesting. What would they know? How would we know? Interesting to know the history and chronology of these buildings. Nice contrast. Interesting when a structure like this becomes the basis for a roundabout even before anybody probably knew the concept roundabout. These old streets, particularly when they pedestrianize them, are so grand because you still have a feeling, a taste, a sense of what the past was like. Be an incense shop nearby because it's wafting down the street. I just wonder if this lower part was attached after the upper part or the main building. The street over from where I was, I walked down an alley because I could see this, what looks like a tower on top of the corner of this building. There's a restaurant nearby called the Lighthouse. There's a shop in an old building, but it's just interesting, that entryway light fixture, and then this stained glass. You wonder if this window is original. An interesting narrow building and a startling graphic treatment of this building. I think it's new because I think the building was so plain, particularly amidst those other older buildings, that this is the dramatic way they tried to puff it up. We're going inside this building, the Argyle Chambers, because it looks interesting. These are mosaics. Whether they're new or not, I don't know. 1904. This looks authentic, and fortunately it's been restored, and the lower shops appear to be almost original. And Chambers, I don't know, that's the name of the fellow perhaps. If not, maybe it was legal offices, who knows. But if it's a reproduction, at least the sign work, at least it looks authentic. St. Enoch's subway station, which I think puts me a little bit further east than I needed to be. Caught my attention was this funky building behind it. A picture of it's on the right hand side when it was the original subway ticket office and the station master lived upstairs. Interesting chunk of history. Not only the ticket office and the station master's home, but it was also the entrance to the subway. Didn't think Glasgow would be this pretty, but it actually is. These buildings are interesting in their antiquity and their Maldorous look. I dropped into this Hindu restaurant and asked if they had salads, in particular Caesar salad. She said, well, we have salads and we can certainly get some Caesar and put it on. We can make Caesar salad. So here's what I have. This man advised me that this also comes with chips, which is so counterintuitive. I think if you were in a church and you asked the priest or the minister for a Bible, he would say, here's your Bible, and that comes with a side order of chips. This is a row of tenement houses, popular in the early part of the 19th century. And we're going to visit one that these folks are coming out of. They weren't here in the early part of the 19th century. A woman and her daughter moved in here when the woman was a relatively young age and stayed for 50 years, perhaps until she died. And what was novel is she, number one, stayed for 50 years, and number two, perfectly maintained it. So we're going in to see something quite original and unique because it still exists. St. Aloysius College. Imagine what such a small yet stately building was it. Said it all. Now there's a bit more. Maybe quite a bit more. I thought this church's domes were interesting. At least that big one in the middle. Don't know if we can get a look inside or not. The neighborhood park was initially designed to have this little amphitheater in it. And maybe that part down to the right of those lamps was where the stage was. And there's some water features, kind of like a faux brook running through some of those rocky outcrops that you see. They're doing some remodeling at the back of the church. In other words, at the front entrance. This is a pretty green black marble. Several different marbles here. I wonder if that dome once had stained glass or whether it was added well after the original construction. So the cross are interesting because they look like they're all stained glass, maybe painted pieces. Hall entry at the head of this street, whatever the street is, but it's peopled by a number of street musicians. Perhaps one of the black fellows that comes from Africa that brings one of his local towns north. Since we're at the Buchannan Street station for the metro and the subway, I guess this is Buchanan Street. For yesterday, where this church, or whatever that is, creates a turnaround or a roundabout before they knew such things existed, and we'll walk down here what I think is St. George Square. Pan about St. George's Square, that's the city chambers. Don't yet know what that statue is. Here a statue of Robert Peel. And still another statue, and then this is the market building in the memory of the Queen's visit to Glasgow in 1848 or 47. This Prince Albert consort. He didn't live that long, but apparently he did some very good things. James Watt. Statues are to various military commanders that were important, usually in the 18th century. All of them knighted as sirs. As much as I love Elton John's work, that them being made sir deminimizes the stature of that title given to these men. Obelisk is to Walter Scott. There's a similar but far more grand one in Edinburgh. The grandiose monument to those who died in the First World War from Glasgow, hammering home once again the absolute insanity of war, and yet perhaps its inevitability. Some things and bang, assuming some older government type building. Notice this dramatic archway, multiple, well, two arches anyway, going back in, I mean. This old building is the Merchant Square. It just reeks of history, doesn't it? The remodel may have removed all the original ambiance. Just a little hint of some of the steel that was here. Very old clock tower. Imagine what would have stood around here when perhaps it was first built. Some interesting structures in the background. That round building or octagon building with a column on with a unicorn on top of that for some reason. Down at Trongate, Glascow Cross. It just sounds like the roar of a subway. Maybe it's underneath there, but you can't get into that area that I can see. Building established in 1906. Another early 19th century bridge. Massive steel. But well maintained. That's nice, isn't it? Walking alongside the river back to the hostel. This area has a lot of towers with clocks in it. That may be for a church, I'm not sure. Plus this interesting building.